we'll see how much space that ends up taking on your computer.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a pretty big hard drive, so. All right, so what are we thinking about? We're thinking about whether psychedelics disrupt the object recognition process.
Right.
And the fact that mystical experiences are ineffable. And perhaps the reason they're ineffable is because the mind doesn't have the capacity to get all the way to object recognition. Therefore, nothing is separate or singular, that everything is mixed. Now, what that made me think is that we've talked a lot about where do we experience images.
Mm-hmm.
And I would assert strongly that the image that we experience is a world of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no idea how if this makes any sense mapping it to brain centers and whatnot, but I wonder if there's got to be a place in the mind where everything is rendered into an object. And I wonder if the image we experience, this makes sense to me in the mind. It's not reproduced, but what we're actually experiencing is the neural state at which things are rendered into objects.
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. But different categories of objects for sure. So where does that end up diverging into one place is what's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I remember learning in class in my cognitive neuroscience class just last week. We were talking about all of these parts of the brain that are responsible for recognition of different things, and I was like, wow, that this your dramaturgy kept coming to mind, because there's like, oh, well, there's a face section, and there's literally a setting place. There's a place gyrus in your brain that's responsible for recognizing the place you are, and there's all those different things are interesting. But it seems like object recognition is like going on all over your temporal lobes. So that's what's.
So where's the image symbol? Because it's experienced as a coherent image.
It is, but it has to be assembled somewhere.
Or I don't know. It seems to me like the more that I read about the brain and think about the brain, that over and over again, it doesn't seem like the brain likes to assemble something and then reproduce it somewhere else. It seems like it likes to use things where they're at. But so I'm thinking about Damasio's concept of as if neurons serving the part of mirror neurons.
Right.
And so it's not like I'm seeing the body state and I'm understanding the body state by recreating the body state, but I'm not then reproducing that somewhere else.
Right. The whole evolution is a conservative process thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so it kind of makes sense to me that I don't think the images are assembled anywhere. I think I think that I don't know, maybe assembled is the right word.
Well, there's the whole thing with sampling, and you can't sample very much at once, and so you can almost imagine like the spotlight of consciousness almost, that is then somehow connected to all sorts of other different brain areas, and then when you go to sample something, then all of a sudden that's the only information that's being reproduced. So you're not having too much information be represented in two different places at once. Or not too much of it, just a little bit of it, just what you're sampling.
What Damasio argues, though, is that you're not reproducing it at all. You're just you're using your loopback neurons to keep them activated. Isn't that what he argues? And that's really conservative. I think that's really interesting.
Wait. Oh, I think I must be following you. I must have been thinking I was following you in error. But what were you saying about the loopback neurons?
So instead of sampling, right, and re-representing something somewhere, my understanding what Damasio is saying is that with the loopback neurons, so let's say you activate a cat, right? So a cat is activated in your mind, and system one is essentially a stream of consciousness, right? So as soon as you're not looking at the cat, then the cat's not going to be represented in the mind. But what the loopback neurons are doing is if the cat is for some reason salient, then I think what he argues that the executive function is doing is not recreating anything, but the executive function is signaling back and keeping the cat activated in the mind. So the same neurons that activated the cat in the first place are still activating the cat, but only because they're looped back, not because they're being activated directly by the sensory cortex.
Right. That makes sense. I'm trying to reassemble his argument in my mind to how that ends up equating to mirror neurons and how they are the same thing. I remember he definitely said they were the same thing.
Yeah. So that's not the mirror neurons, though. That's the loopback neurons, which are essentially the executive function. So I think the argument that he's making is that, we don't have this executive function in one part of our brain so that we think of a cat here, and then the executive function reproduces and holds like the cat in some special place in the executive function that it loops back. With the mirror neurons and the as if states, I think that's more in the motor cortex of the body, the motor cortex, right? That if for synchronized action, we have the ability to store a series of body states, hold those in mind so that we can activate them, boom, 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 boom. Then the same architecture that can hold a body state can also be used to simulate a body state.
Right.
In essence, to look at something and say, this is what my body would feel like if I were the thing that I'm looking at.
Right.
And once again, Damasio seems to me to be consistently conservative.
Right. Okay. Yep. That makes sense.
So bringing all this together, though, based on that conservative kind of structure, then wherever the object is recognized, that's where it's activated. And that's probably where it's experienced. So maybe assembling isn't, I don't know.
So it's like, but I mean, so then you're experiencing very large chunks of cortex at a time.
So I don't think so, though. This is the thing that, like, I encourage you to think about as you're driving. It feels like we're seeing the whole road and the trees and the cars around us and everything else. But in reality, our attentional is scanning.
Right.
And so in many ways, I mean, short-term memory. I think there's only like so many things that are ever activated in that field at a given time.
Right. Well, the same way that you have a feeling that your visual field is much larger than it actually is, because whenever you look in any direction, then it's still there. Yeah. No. Yeah. Um. That's what you're getting across, right? Is the small amount that we sample at once.
Exactly.
Right.
And it always feels large because because I have the ability to sample anything anytime.
Right.
I
Well,
can
let me rephrase then. Is that we appear to have the ability to sample from um, a very large section of cortex. Then, I mean, somehow we have to be able to sample information from like lots of different places. So I guess that's not saying anything crazy, but how that's happening is it's a mystery.
What makes sense to me is almost it's almost like a computer screen, right? So you've got the visual field,
Mm-hmm.
and so what do you do with the computer screen? You put like things that you can click all over the computer screen.
Right.
So I mean, I think it's almost like that. Like everything in the visual field is clickable.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, we're only clicking maybe only one thing at a time. Maybe. I mean, maybe if I hold more than one thing at a time in mind, I'm not actually holding both things. Um, I'm not actually holding both things, but I've created essentially a new object that's both things.
Right. Well, that's what I think McGilchrist would say, that like your two hemispheres are basically in an argument over what things are things, right? Because you have one that's trying to give you like gestalt objects. Your right hemisphere is trying to lump things together as one clickable thing, maybe, and then your left is trying to split that thing together into multiple clickable things.
Hmm. Is that what the left's trying to do, or is the left's trying to decide what to click next, or if there's something more important to be clicking on?
I think that. I mean, I think McGilchrist would say that both of those things, I think, are occurring. Because I mean, but definitely there is that, but there's also the right hemisphere does processing much more globally, and the left hemisphere does processing much more locally. That was one of the one of the thrusts of the book was that. Like if you like oftentimes someone with left hemisphere damage, so someone just using their right hemisphere, if you ask them to reproduce a letter made of letters, so for example like a Y that's made up of a bunch of Z's in the shape of a in the shape of a in the shape of a Y, it'll just draw a Y. Whereas if you're just functioning on your left hemisphere, so you have your right hemisphere damaged, then you'll just draw a mass of Z's that are not in any coherent shape.
Right.
So, so go ahead.
Well, well, in essence, we're saying that the left and right hemispheres do exactly what we just described, i.e., the left hemisphere is looking at the totality of things, so essentially is creating the screen, and the right hemisphere is doing the click. Is representing the click.
Right. Sure. Well, okay. Sure.
I mean, so I don't know. I don't. You said that they're at tension with each other. It seems to me like we're generally pretty happy with our gestalt. I think the mind is like happy with its gestalt unless there's a reason not to be.
Okay.
So I don't think there's a tension going on
Sure.
where once I've decided something's a cat, that I keep asking, is that really a cat? Unless something gets disrupted.
You don't look at a cat and be like, should I really think about this as a cat, or should I think of this as a collection of like organs or molecules or something? Like you don't do that. No.
Occasionally, but not typically. Not with every cat for sure.
What's that?
Not with every cat, unless it's Schrodinger's cat.
Man.
Because that cat's both alive and dead at the same time.
Right.
No, I don't. I think that's one of the problems, and this is something that. So I'm teaching critical thinking on Thursday, right? And I'm sad because I don't think my students will get what there is to get there. But we've talked about schemas, and the whole problem with schemas, and all models are wrong, but some models are useful, is that we're not interrogating our models. I mean, that's not what the mind is typically doing. It's usually really fat, dumb, and happy with, as long as it can achieve some type of coherence.
Mm-hmm.
I think typically it's. I mean, I would say overinvested in the coherence, but the reality is, I think the mind is exquisitely tuned, so it's probably exactly invested in the coherence.
Right.
Especially for a hunter-gatherer society 50,000 years ago, assuming that we're not changing exponentially fast.
Right.
Because most of the complexity that we deal with now is social complexity.
Right. That's true. Well, I'm thinking so. Yeah, right. Well, but that's where you get into the right left hemisphere that you were talking about earlier, is that if you and Gazzaniga would like this, talking about the left as an interpreter, is that if you knock out the right, the left is much less likely to ever interrogate its models at all.
Right.
Which is why you get people with right hemisphere damage that will have, or they'll have neglect, that will not have half of their they'll not have half of their visual field. They won't have access to it, and they won't notice.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen the other way around.
So I wonder if people with left hemisphere damage, I mean, do they experience different objects?
Well, that's the other thing I said. So left hemisphere people, like if you they seem to process objects very globally. Again, if you give them the Y made of Z's, they'll just draw a Y and ignore the fact that it's made of Z's. So it isn't decomposing into parts. Which is, yeah.
So the question we were asking is, where do we experience objects? So we were thinking about the object recognition process and psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
So is it? I wonder if it's a hemisphere thing. I mean, I would imagine if it's a hemisphere thing, someone would have picked up on that a long time ago. If you were
Assuming you could tell if a person wasn't experiencing objects, which I hope would be the case.
Well, I mean, if they could report on their experience,
mhm.
and I guess is what I'm saying. If object recognition is exclusively the domain of the left hemisphere, then and you would think if you're not like experiencing objects, then you would see less activity in the left hemisphere or something like that.
Right, right. I mean, if you were not seeing objects, I think it is the case to some extent that if you're not seeing objects, then I think, well, what was that test? I wish I remember what the results of this was, but showing like random, like pixelated images, like just random pixelation versus showing images is definitely like functioning differently. It's lateralized to some degree too, I think. I think it is left lateralized, the activity too.
It's a funny feedback.
Oh, do you hear a bunch of feedback?
Just a little bit. Like every time I laugh.
Let's see if this works better. I have two like satellite speakers here, so they were kind of pointed in. So is that better? Laugh. No.
It's about the same, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's really not that bad.
Okay. Yeah.
I do feel like I feel like we're on to some stuff.
It's like do we like the objects that we experience, are they the process of our are they the experience of the most local processing that our brain is doing at the moment? Like, do we experience the most local processing? And so that if we want to go more local, if we want to go into more detail, like we definitely experience that level. As it becomes more detailed, we're on the edge. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Keep going. I'm not exactly with you.
Okay, so say the brain is processing an object both globally and locally. Maybe and maybe there's a gradient there that and a gradient that it can do. So do you think that the images that we experience are of the most locally processed version that our brain is doing at the time? So if our brain is processing an object at multiple levels, are we experiencing the one that's the most broken down and atomized?
When you say that we're processing an object at many levels, what would those different levels be?
Well, it'd be interesting to think about what it would be on like just a day to day. I mean, again, I'm thinking of the y made of z's and how your brain is doing that differently. But I mean, I suppose you can. Maybe the cocktail effect is an example of this. where there's like low level processing of like the whole room of conversation, and you're processing it, but not very consciously.
Right.
Because you can pay attention to an individual conversation, but you are actually processing the global picture too on some level of your brain, because it picks up on if someone says your name. So it actually is processing the global information, and if something shows up, it'll shift your information to it. But you're not experiencing the more global picture until it tells you to do something local.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And that's the right hemisphere, right?
Right. So your right hemisphere might be, well, yeah. It'd be really interesting to see, like, the study, because they've done studies on this, with different ears, and telling people to listen to different things in different ears and all sorts of stuff like that. So I don't know the specific studies, but I know people have tried to basically mimic the cocktail effect.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, though. I mean, if in as much as the left hemisphere is processing the thing that's being focused on, right, the thing that's in the cone of attention,
Mm-hmm.
and the right hemisphere is scanning. It's exactly what we're talking about, right? So the right hemisphere is scanning for anything that we should be paying attention to instead of what we're currently paying attention to. So it's your attention switching. I mean, so
Right.
that would be exactly the cocktail effect. From everything we said about the right hemisphere, the cocktail effect is exactly what you would expect it to produce.
Right.
You know, and I don't know whether McGilchrist was right and whether it's truly hemispheric or not. I mean, it makes sense to me, but I think just as a conceptual model of attentional management, I think it's probably pretty close to right.
Right. And I will say, large chunks of what he says in the book were just taught in my cognitive neuroscience class last week. So,
Right.
I mean, a lot of the pillars of what he was saying is at least not just him.
Right.
Even Tony Jack thinks everything is wrong. Gazzaniga doesn't think everything is wrong. So
maybe we just know the wrong neuroscientist.
yes. Gazzaniga and the guy who wrote Anxious, who name I have a mental block against remembering Ledoux's name for some reason. But does that ever happen to you, where you have to say something, a name, something, or someone's name over and over and over again, and for some reason that just particular name will not stick?
Yeah, I have two kids. One's named Peter, one's named Henry, and I call Henry Peter like every single day. It's a weird. It's like a mental block, right? It's like that is the information that my system one's giving me to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Like every single time, or oftentimes, yeah, I just get a mental block, and I can't remember a name. Yeah, that's a strange thing.
Makes you think of what was that? The no, it's not that funny. What did they call it? Well, they did the single cell reading, where they like found like cells in parts of the cortex that would only respond to like particular people's names and stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This is like in the 80s, I think. But they were like they were asking the person about different celebrities. Like they found a cell that would only respond. The only thing they could find that would fire to was if you named a particular celebrity, and they named the cells after that celebrity. And I have no idea who the celebrity is, so it wasn't a really
Johnny
good.
Carson.
It wasn't Johnny. It was some woman.
Mm-hmm. Ava Gabor.
I don't know. Someone attractive, I guess. But
Or
okay, well, sure. Um, almost makes you wonder if like my my little cell for him, my grandmother's cell. It's the same concept. The grandmother cell, or the Gnostic unit is apparently another name for the grandmother cell. But you wonder if there's something wrong with my Gnostic unit for that name.
I wouldn't tell that to a girl.
What?
Wouldn't tell a girl that you had a problem with your Gnostic unit. She might get the wrong impression.
Yep.
So we should probably go. What did we learn today?
Oh, great. Summation time.
So, I mean, what occurs to me is I think it's useful to think about what we've been talking about a lot, and where do we experience images. And I think the unique thing that we were talking about today is the possibility that we experience images in the place where object recognition occurs. And that led us to thinking about the left and right hemisphere and the difference between, is there a relationship between object recognition and the gestalt that occurs in the left hemisphere?
Right.
And to what extent is the left and the right hemisphere responsible for our seeming experience of a holistic reality from which we can sample?
Right. And we got there from thinking about how psychedelics might be a failure of object recognition, and so the experience is then very different.
Yeah.
And we mapped the cocktail party effect onto the hemispheres in a way that
McGilchrist and let them know.
What's that?
We should write McGilchrist and let them know.
Yeah.
So here's the other thing, switching gears just a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
So is there any way we get Skype to transcribe something?
Oh, I'm sure. It might be hilarious, the mistakes it makes every once in a while. Have you seen like when YouTube transcriber is doing a bad job feeding up subtitles for a video? Oh, it's bad sometimes. It's really bad at songs. Like it can't do songs to save its life.
Big old jet had a light on.
Yeah. But I bet so. I bet. Let me look. Let me look.
If not, we could probably play the recording for something that can transcribe it. Worst case scenario.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I told you. So if we could just upload it to YouTube.
And then YouTube will transcribe it?
Actually, we could upload these on YouTube and make them private videos. Do you know how to do that?
I can probably figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, unless you.
Why
you
make
want
them private? Why don't we share what's beautiful with the world? You're not ready for stardom?
If you want to do it, you have my okay.
World's gonna find out about your Gnostic unit.
Oh, it's bad. It's bad. Yeah, I mean, this conversation would be fine.
Yes, there's others that we've had that I've brought.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a time and place for everything.
Yeah. But yeah, I know if you want to, I mean, it would be interesting. It would be really interesting to see what people on YouTube actually thought about this.
So we just randomly put this up, like people on YouTube are just gonna watch it.
Yeah, well, especially if you like tag neuroscience psychology, McGilchrist, Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
uh,
Two neurocognitive rubes
yeah,
on this universe.
you could definitely put rubes as one of the tags too.
A naive conversation about neuroscience.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if we were putting on YouTube, you want like the you could call it the naive conversation series.
I like it.
Or maybe the uninformed conversation.
Two dudes.
Well, if you did that, then we would need to make like the thumbnail both the dude from The Big Lebowski, like but two of him.
Ooh. One is the left hemisphere and one is the right hemisphere.
Oh, man,
I think he has a psychedelic dream in The Big Lebowski.
I mean, he dreams of his rug.
Which... No. He has the whole sequence where like he's a bowling ball and all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah, that's true. He does.
Jackie Treehorn drugs him.
Yeah, that's true.
Probably
not psychedelics though. I don't think you'd use psychedelics to knock somebody out.
Maybe not. So here's one thing that I thought of during our conversation, is that you and I have talked about Sachs admitted essentially taking LSD.
Oh, I'm sure.
Wouldn't you love to have like his Sachs's LSD notebooks? Because you know he wrote about it.
Right. I mean, yes, I want that very much. The
Man who mistook for the white fur hat, the one where the guy can smell like a dog, right? That's supposedly Sachs.
Right.
I wonder if there's more of that. I'd be interested.
For sure. Well, it's crazy to like. It seems like everyone who studies them ends up taking them.
I'm not planning on it, but
no, of course not.
Of course.
But I mean, the people who have would surprise you. I mean, Aldous Huxley and Jung, Freud, Peterson, even.
So it's interesting that your eyes are turned to the right while you're thinking.
Is that interesting?
I don't know. What's it saying about your hemispheres?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, now they were going to the left while I thought about that question, though. So.
But I mean, the fact they were going to the right, it wasn't like they were darting to the right.
Like you were observing them slowly go to the right, as I thought.
No, they were just fixated. Like you were thinking, you were inside your head.
Right. Well, I didn't need to be doing anything. I mean.
And yet, you were still aware of the visual field, probably.
Maybe the right hemisphere was.
Right. Yeah, you were still sampling. So that's probably actually like a pretty good idea of what the right is like without the left. When we're walking and we're taking in the whole visual field, right? But we're daydreaming and our minds are somewhere else. So essentially, our attentional focus is turned inward, and we're probably generating images from memory instead of generating images from sensory input, at least in the left hemisphere.
Hmm. Man, yeah, I wonder. Yeah, that probably is. But I mean, it's really hard to think about because you're always concentrating on something else while this is going on. So thinking about what's going on at the periphery is hard.
Right, right.
Well, I mean, as soon as you try, it's almost impossible. Like you just have. It's one of those things you have to like relax and then let it happen. Although I've wondered a little bit. I sometimes feel like when I wake up in the morning, like speaking in these terms, it's like my left hemisphere wakes up more slowly than my right, and so when I'm first awake, I I bet. I don't know how long the time period is. Maybe we'll say it's a half an hour. I bet that like the first half an hour when I wake up, my openness, if you were to rate my big five personality, would be way higher than the whole rest of the day.
Well, that's why I like taking a shower. I like working out than taking a shower because your mind's still wide open.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's almost like it's unprimed by sensory data,
Hmm.
and so it's. I mean, it's interesting. And so if we talked about before, and McGilchrist talks about the way the left hemisphere is necking down on things.
Yeah. Yeah. But I wonder if in the morning your your object recognition takes a while to start. Um,
Build up a cache.
well, maybe that, but also um, maybe it's looser. Because here's the thing, even like in psychedelics, there's a what's the way to say it? There's like a gradient of it. It's because you can take like depending like say you're dosing LSD, it doesn't work with DMT because basically you either break through or there's nothing with DMT. But the how much of a gradient there is depending on what chemical you're taking. But with LSD, there's you ramp up the experience and you're more and more like open, so to speak. It seems almost as if um, until you reach a particular point, and then when you take that point, that's when the idea of you completely dissolves into the everything else. And that's called either ego death or breaking through, depending on who you're talking about.
Depending on your perception of the ego.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've been thinking about that too with like Buddhist meditation. I mean, to what extent are they unhinging the mind?
Right. Right. Well, they're right. Well, what I was getting at though is so it's like what if when you wake up in the morning, your mind so that gradient of okay, so like say here is like really great object recognition, then you go all the way here to ego death, and so in the morning your object recognition is like here, and then it goes back to here for the rest of the day for the most part, which is how you can take showers with a very open mind and get all sorts of
Experience the universe.
right. I would love you to read William James's description of a mystical experience and see if your showers in the morning count.
What book is that
That's in I think it's actually I have it on my shelf. The varieties of religious experience.
The varieties of religious experience.
Yep.
Solid. I would like to take a read of that.
Oh, and if you're really interested, you could go to. I wonder if you can find it. You probably can. So John Hopkins has been doing, they've been doing psychedelic experiments for a good while now. Some of the best research, as far as I can tell, is coming out of Roland Griffith's lab there. What?
Who in Griffith?
Dr. Roland Griffiths.
Oh, Roland. Got it.
Yep. But he actually, based on, he made a mystical experience questionnaire based on William James's criteria, which is how he got. So, you know, the higher you scored on the mystical experience questionnaire, well, the more likely, I think he correlated it with the people with the smoking cessation. So the higher you scored on the mystical experience questionnaire, the more likely you were to be successful quitting smoking afterwards. But he's been using the William James based mystical experience questionnaire for a lot of the psychedelic research, just as to look at how much of that the various individuals have had.
Very cool.
So you should take the questionnaire. I bet you could find it, actually. Probably not that hard online if you just found the study.
Tell me his last name again.
Griffiths.
Griffiths. Okay. Roland Griffiths.
Yep.
Got it.
And he's on YouTube too. He actually has a TED Talk, I think. But he's done some YouTube stuff which was interesting. I think the big one he's on that I remember is he did a video with a woman talking about administering psychedelics to people who have terminal cancer diagnoses to help them and looking at how that's like helped them find a sort of peace, but also like finding a meaning in struggling valiantly for the rest of their life, basically. And doing and basically continuing to just not giving up on being who they want to be, even though their life is almost coming to an end, basically.
I probably ought to be going.
Sure, that's fair. Sorry, I really talked your head off the last minute there.
No. It was good stuff. I just feel guilty.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, remember, don't end the call until you press stop recording, or else you'll lose it. And then feel free to stick this on YouTube. And if you do, you probably can get them to give us a transcript, actually.